A shocking discovery destroyed my marriage, but that betrayal led me to a life I never saw coming. This is how losing everything became the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm Mike, 36, and my wife, Sarah, is 34. We've been married for 9 years, and on the surface, we're the picture-perfect couple. Sarah has this charm: she lights up any room she walks into. She's beautiful, confident, and has this amazing ability to make people believe every word she says, no matter what. I used to think it was one of her best qualities, but now, well, now I see it differently. For the longest time, I thought we were solid. We'd had the typical ups and downs, but nothing too serious. At least, that's what I thought until a few months ago. That's when things started feeling off. It began with small changes. Sarah had always been big on fitness, but suddenly, she was obsessed with it. She'd be at the gym every day, sometimes twice a day. She'd come home with this post-workout glow and talk about her progress and how amazing her new trainer, Jake, was. At first, I didn't think anything of it. In fact, I was happy for her. But as the weeks went on, I couldn't ignore this feeling that something wasn't right. There was a new distance between us. The conversations we used to have over dinner started to feel like small talk. She became glued to her phone, texting late at night, keeping her screen out of sight whenever I walked into the room. When I asked her about it, she'd shrug it off, saying it was just the girls or gym stuff with Jake. But the way she looked at me while saying it, it didn't feel genuine. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, I casually mentioned that we should do a workout session together, maybe join one of her personal training sessions with Jake. She froze for a split second before brushing me off with a laugh, saying, "Oh, Mike, you wouldn't keep up." She tried to make a joke out of it, but there was something in her tone, like she didn't want me there. That conversation lingered in my mind, and from that point on, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. Every little thing Sarah did felt suspicious. She'd started spending more time at the gym, often staying late, claiming she was pushing herself harder to reach new goals. And that post-workout glow she came home with? It was starting to feel less like a workout and more like something else. I tried to brush it off as paranoia. I mean, she'd never given me a reason not to trust her. But every time she mentioned Jake, her whole face would light up. It was always, "Jake says this," or, "Jake thinks I should try that." I started to feel like I was competing with a guy I'd never even met. One Saturday, I decided to surprise her at the gym. She'd told me she'd be training in the evening, and I thought I'd drop by to see her in action. Maybe it'd reassure me, make me feel like I was just overthinking everything. So I drove over, figuring I'd catch her in the middle of one of those high-intensity sessions she kept talking about. When I arrived, I scanned the place, looking for her. After a few minutes, I spotted her across the gym. She was in the middle of a one-on-one session with Jake, who was, unsurprisingly, a tall, muscular, athletic guy with this overly friendly smile. They were close, too close. He was spotting her as she lifted weights, his hands hovering near her lower back, his face way closer to hers than seemed necessary. They hadn't seen me yet, so I stood back, watching. I kept telling myself it was just a normal training session. But when they finished the set, he leaned in, saying something that made her laugh a little too hard, her hand resting on his arm for just a moment too long. I could feel my heart pounding as I watched them. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was reading too much into it, that maybe this was just how she interacted with her trainer. But the casual way her hand lingered on his arm, the way she laughed, it wasn't the kind of laugh she shared with me anymore. Something about it felt intimate. I decided to walk over and say hi, maybe catch them off guard and see how they'd react. As I approached, Sarah spotted me first. For a split second, her face froze, eyes widening just enough for me to notice. But she quickly covered it with a smile, waving as if she was thrilled to see me. "Mike. What a surprise," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. She pulled her hand away from Jake's arm and stepped toward me, giving me a quick hug. It felt stiff, forced. Jake gave me a polite nod, his friendly smile just a little too smooth. "Hey, you must be Mike," he said, extending a hand. "Sarah's told me a lot about you." I shook his hand, keeping my expression neutral. "Yeah, I've heard a lot about you, too," I replied, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. Sarah glanced nervously between us, her smile faltering slightly. I forced a smile and looked at her. "I thought I'd come check out this famous workout of yours. Didn't want to miss all the excitement." Sarah gave an awkward laugh and glanced at Jake, who shot her a quick look, almost as if they were silently communicating. "Actually, Mike, we're just about done," she said quickly. "I was going to shower and head home in a bit." "Great. I'll wait," I said, not giving her a chance to brush me off. I settled into one of the nearby chairs and watched as Sarah shot Jake a brief, tense look before disappearing toward the locker room. As I waited for Sarah to finish up, I noticed Jake glance in my direction a couple of times. He seemed uneasy. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, but something about his demeanor added fuel to the suspicions already boiling inside me. Sarah finally emerged from the locker room, looking put together and refreshed. She forced a smile as we left the gym together, but the entire ride home, there was this awkward silence between us. She kept glancing out the window, avoiding any real conversation. Over the next few days, I tried to put the incident out of my mind, but my suspicions kept growing. Sarah was still heading to the gym, still texting late at night. She'd laugh quietly at her phone, completely engrossed. Every time I'd ask who she was texting, she'd brush it off with a quick, "Oh, just a friend," and flash me this too sweet smile that no longer felt genuine. Then, one evening, I noticed she'd left her phone on the kitchen counter. Normally, I'd never go through her messages, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. With my heart pounding, I picked it up, just to check the time. As the screen lit up, I saw a notification from Jake, his name followed by a heart emoji. That was it. The confirmation I didn't want to find. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling, wondering how long this had been going on and what else I'd missed. After seeing that message from Jake, I knew I had to confront this head-on. But instead of blowing up or accusing her outright, I decided to take a different approach. The next day, I told Sarah I wanted to join her for a workout. I watched her reaction carefully. She looked surprised, even a bit nervous, but quickly covered it with a smile. "Sure," she said, sounding forced but enthusiastic. "It'll be fun." When we arrived at the gym, she introduced me to Jake, who put on the same overly friendly smile from the last time we'd met. We started the workout, and I made a point of sticking close to Sarah, joining her for each set. I pushed myself harder than usual, maybe a bit too hard, but I wasn't going to back down in front of him. Throughout the session, Jake kept throwing subtle glances at Sarah, and she'd respond with these small, almost imperceptible nods or smiles. It was subtle, but it was there, and the tension between them was something I couldn't ignore. After about an hour, we wrapped up the session, and I told Sarah I'd head to the locker room to shower. She nodded, saying she'd be a bit longer since she had a cool-down routine to finish. I agreed, heading to the showers, though my mind was racing. Part of me wanted to double back and see what she was up to, but I held off. I finished up quickly, hoping to catch her wrapping up as well. But when I stepped out of the locker room and didn't see her in the main area, I assumed she was still getting changed. So, I went out to the car to wait, figuring she'd join me shortly. I'd been standing by the car for about 15 minutes, checking my phone and wondering what was taking Sarah so long. Just as I was about to text her, I realized I didn't have my watch. I'd taken it off before the workout and must have left it in my locker. Frustrated, I headed back inside to grab it. I walked through the quiet hall toward the lockers, quickly found my watch, and slipped it on. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of the main workout area. And that's when I saw them. There, in the corner of the gym, stood Sarah and Jake. She was fully dressed, her bag slung over her shoulder, looking like she was about to leave. But instead of walking out, she was leaning close to him, their heads tilted toward each other. And then, right in front of me, they kissed. Not a friendly peck or anything casual, this was unmistakably intimate. Her hand rested on his chest, his fingers lightly touching her waist. A surge of anger exploded inside me. I felt my legs moving before my mind had even processed it. I stormed through the gym, crossing the floor in seconds. They broke apart just as I reached them, and the shock in their eyes only fueled my fury. Without thinking, I swung at Jake, my fist connecting with his jaw, and he stumbled back, stunned. My heart pounded as I turned to Sarah, my voice shaking with rage. "How could you?" I managed, barely keeping my composure. Her face went pale, her mouth opening as if to explain, but I didn't wait for her excuses. Was this what all those late nights were about? Was it worth destroying everything we built? I demanded, my voice echoing in the empty gym. Jake, still recovering, tried to step forward, but I shot him a look that must have told him not to push his luck. Sarah finally found her voice, but it came out in a whisper. "Mike, I can explain." "Explain?" I laughed bitterly. "You think there's anything left to explain?" Without waiting for another word, I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her out of the gym. She didn't resist, her face still pale and shocked, as if she'd been caught in a nightmare she couldn't escape. My grip was tight, and I didn't care if anyone saw us. Right then, I just needed to get her out of there. We walked to the car in silence. I opened the door, practically shoving her in before getting into the driver's seat myself. The second I turned the ignition, the anger I'd barely been holding back erupted. "How long, Sarah?" I demanded, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. "How long have you been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back?" She sat there, staring out the window, not answering. Her silence only stoked the fire inside me. "Do you have any idea what it's like to see your wife, kissing another man? To know that while I was trusting you, you were out there, doing whatever you wanted?" Still, she said nothing, just staring ahead as if the weight of what she'd done had finally settled in. My words were loud, raw, every ounce of betrayal spilling out in that car. But she just sat there, looking down at her hands, not offering a single explanation. When we pulled into the driveway, I got out, slammed the door, and walked to her side, waiting as she slowly stepped out, her head down. We walked inside, the tension between us like a storm about to break. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't keep it in any longer. "And now, Sarah," I said, my voice cold and steady, "pack your things and go. I don't care where. Just go anywhere but here." She looked up, tears in her eyes, searching my face for any hint of mercy. But I was done. Whatever excuses she had, whatever explanations she thought could make this better, I didn't want to hear it. I turned away, leaving her standing there, letting her face the consequences of the choice she'd made. The moment Sarah left, I felt an emptiness in the house that I couldn't ignore. It was quiet, painfully so, but the betrayal left no room for doubt. I wasn't just going to let her walk away from this unscathed. If she'd been so quick to throw away our life together, then I'd make sure she felt the weight of that decision in every possible way. The next morning, I called a lawyer, someone highly recommended for divorce cases involving infidelity. His name was Tom, and he was known for being ruthless. I didn't want just any lawyer, I wanted someone who would go after everything. The house, the assets, everything we'd built, I wanted it all. When I explained the situation, Tom listened carefully, his voice calm and professional. "Mike," he said, "we can make this as difficult as you want. If you're looking to keep everything, I'll make sure we go after it all. She won't walk away easily, especially if there's proof of infidelity." "I have the proof," I replied, feeling a surge of determination. I don't want her walking away with anything. Not after what she's done. Understood, Tom said. Let's get started. I'll be in touch with what we'll need to gather on our end. Trust me, Mike, we'll make sure she understands the cost of this betrayal. After hanging up, I felt a dark satisfaction settle over me. This wasn't just about getting what I deserved, it was about making sure she didn't get away with the life we built together while she played around with her trainer. The gears were set in motion, and soon she'd realized just how much she'd thrown away. That same evening, needing a break from everything, I decided to grab a drink at a bar downtown. I wanted to clear my mind, step away from the anger that had been consuming me. But little did I know that walking into that bar would change everything. As I ordered a drink and sat at the bar, I noticed a woman sitting a few seats away. She had this easy smile, a natural confidence that was impossible to ignore. She noticed me watching and flashed a quick smile, one that was warm but not overly forward. After a few minutes, I found myself moving closer, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, a genuine spark. Mind if I join you? I asked, feeling a little foolish for the sudden interest. Not at all, she replied, her smile widening. Her name was Emily, and from the moment we started talking, I felt an ease that I hadn't felt in years. She was funny, quick-witted, and didn't pry. She didn't know my story, and I didn't need to know hers. All I knew was that for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt alive. We talked for hours, sharing stories, laughing, and for a few moments, I forgot about everything waiting for me back home. The bitterness, the betrayal, the plans for revenge, it all faded as I sat there with her, captivated by every word. By the end of the night, I knew I wanted to see her again. As I walked out of the bar, I couldn't help but feel like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, and I felt a steady sense of purpose as I walked into that room. This day was the result of weeks spent gathering every piece of evidence of Sarah's betrayal, the endless messages with Jake, the photos, the hotel and spa receipts, even records of our joint funds used for her secret weekends with him. Every detail painted a vivid picture of deception. Sarah sat across the courtroom from me, trying to appear composed. She probably thought she could walk away with her head held high, convinced she'd at least walk away with half of everything we'd built together. But her calm started to crack as my lawyer, Tom, presented our case with unflinching precision. Tom didn't hold back. Piece by piece, he laid out her lies for everyone in that courtroom to see. He started with her messages to Jake, revealing an affair that had gone on for months and extended to expensive getaways, all while I trusted her, unknowingly footing the bill. When she tried to deny the depth of their relationship, Tom calmly presented the photos, moments where she and Jake had been far from just friends. Finally, Tom brought out the bank records, showing how Sarah had been using our shared funds to finance her affair. There was no way to hide the truth. I watched Sarah's face go pale as every part of her deception came to light. She knew, as well as I did, that she had lost the upper hand. When the judge handed down the ruling, it was clear that the truth was on my side. I was awarded the house, our primary assets, and the bulk of our joint savings. Sarah, on the other hand, was left with barely enough to start over. She'd walked in expecting to leave with a clean break and a substantial payout, but she left the courtroom nearly empty-handed. It was over. But I wasn't finished. Sarah had learned her lesson in the courtroom, but Jake had yet to feel the full weight of his choices. After the storm of the divorce and everything that came with it, I wasn't expecting to find happiness so soon. But somehow, life had a way of surprising me. Emily, the woman I'd met at the bar that night, turned out to be everything I didn't know I needed. She was kind, genuine, and brought a calm into my life that had been missing for years. It didn't take long for things between us to grow serious. We started spending almost every night together, and before I knew it, we were talking about moving in. It felt natural, easy. We found a place, decorated it together, and built a life that was honest and open. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could come home and feel like I was where I belonged. One evening, Emily was out meeting a friend, and I was in the middle of unpacking some boxes when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I went over, figuring it might be a neighbor or a delivery. But when I opened the door, there stood Sarah, looking far different from the confident woman I'd last seen in court. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face drawn with regret. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, as if hoping I'd invite her inside. "Mike, please. I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice soft and pleading. I crossed my arms, keeping the door only partially open. "What do you want, Sarah?" She took a shaky breath. "I want to try again. I know I messed up, and I've paid the price. But maybe we could find a way back to what we had. You don't have to forgive me right away. Just, let me in, and we can talk." I looked at her, and I felt nothing. Whatever feelings I'd once had were gone. I had a new life now, one where I didn't have to question, or worry, or wonder if I was enough. I had a life with someone who valued trust, and I wasn't about to throw that away. "No, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "I've moved on. I'm with someone else now." Her eyes widened, and desperation crept into her voice. "Who is she? Who is she, Mike?" Her voice grew louder, her emotions spilling over as she looked past me, trying to see into the house. I didn't owe her any answers. I took a deep breath, gave her one last look, and then, without another word, I simply closed the door, shutting out the past once and for all. After shutting the door on Sarah, I felt a sense of closure, but there was one part of this story that didn't sit right. Jake, the man who'd helped unravel my life, wreck my marriage, and then carried on as if it meant nothing. The same guy who'd been exposed in court yet somehow managed to escape the fallout with his business mostly intact. The thought of him smugly continuing his life after everything he'd done burned at me. So, I decided to make sure that Jake felt the full weight of his actions. If he thought he'd walked away clean, he was about to get a brutal reality check. First, I gathered everything I had on him, not just from my own experience, but from other sources as well. During the court case, I dug up complaints from his clients, comments from women who had felt uncomfortable with his overly familiar training methods. A few phone calls later, and I had testimonials from some who were willing to come forward, anonymously if necessary, and share what they'd experienced. I reached out to a few fitness blogs and influencers with large followings in our city. They loved a juicy story, especially one about a once popular local trainer whose personalized approach had crossed the line with multiple clients. Once I explained the background, they were all in. Within a few days, several articles went live exposing Jake's conduct, painting him as the unprofessional, unethical person he was. Social media picked up on it quickly, and within hours, his business's reputation was spiraling. But I didn't stop there. Jake had built his career on this image of being the respectful, trustworthy trainer. I knew a few gym owners in the area and made some discreet calls, sending them links to the stories circulating about him. By the end of the week, he'd been dropped from multiple gyms, effectively losing his access to new clients. The final piece? I contacted a professional investigator. I paid them to dig into Jake's finances, his social media, anything that could hint at sketchy practices or unpaid dues. It turned out, he was dodging some back taxes and had a few other skeletons in his closet. Nothing illegal, but enough to tip off a few people in the industry who could make life harder for him. His licenses, his reputation, and his income, all of it was about to come crashing down. Jake had taken my trust, my marriage, and a big part of my life. But now, with his career and reputation in ruins, he'd have to start from scratch, if he could even find anyone willing to work with him again. As the days passed, Jake's downfall unfolded just as I'd planned. The blog articles and social media posts had spread like wildfire, and with each new piece of gossip or shared post, his reputation took another hit. He was losing clients by the day. People who had once sung his praises were now leaving scathing reviews, warning others to stay away. I'll admit, seeing his business crumble brought a certain satisfaction. It felt like justice, a balancing of the scales. I'd lost so much because of his actions, and now he was getting a taste of the consequences. One afternoon, I decided to pay a visit to the gym where Jake used to work, just to see the fallout firsthand. Walking in, I noticed that the usual buzz around the place had shifted. Jake's name was whispered, but not in admiration anymore. Staff members exchanged looks, clients pointed to his now empty training slot on the schedule. The once busy corner of the gym where he trained clients now sat deserted. As I was about to leave, I caught sight of Jake himself, packing up his things in a duffel bag, looking defeated. He didn't see me, but I could tell by the way his shoulders slumped, the way he avoided eye contact with everyone, that he knew his time here was over. Rumor had it that management had asked him to leave to avoid further damage to their own reputation. Seeing him there, isolated, humbled, well, it felt like poetic justice. Later that evening, I got a message from Tom, my lawyer, with an update. Jake had hired a lawyer of his own and was trying to fight back against the bad press and the backlash. But it was too late. The damage was done, and every attempt he made to clear his name only drew more attention to the mess he'd made. Meanwhile, my life with Emily was moving forward. She knew the whole story, but she didn't judge me for wanting this closure. She supported me, encouraged me to finish what I'd started, and kept me grounded through it all. The revenge I'd planned was complete. I'd taken back control over the life Sarah and Jake had tried to destroy, and I was finally ready to leave the bitterness behind. With Jake's reputation in tatters and Sarah left to pick up the pieces on her own, I felt a weight lifting. They'd both lost everything they'd taken for granted. And me? I was finally free. Just when I thought the dust had settled and I could move on, something happened that threw me completely off guard. A few weeks after Jake's professional and social downfall, I received an unexpected email from him. I almost deleted it without reading, assuming it was some weak attempt at an apology or plea. But curiosity got the better of me. The subject line read, "You should know the truth." The email was brief, almost cryptic. "Mike, you may think you know everything, but you don't. There are things Sarah didn't tell you, things that I didn't even know until recently. Meet me tomorrow, and I'll tell you everything." Attached to the email was a single photo, a blurred, grainy image of Sarah at what looked like a clinic or doctor's office. She was seated, facing away from the camera, and seemed completely unaware that the photo had been taken. My stomach twisted as I tried to make sense of it. Part of me didn't want to respond. After all, what good could come of meeting with him? But something about his tone, the way he hinted at secrets Sarah had hidden even from him, got under my skin. What could she still be hiding? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him the next day at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. I sat there waiting, conflicted and more than a little irritated with myself for even showing up. But when Jake walked in, he looked different, haunted, exhausted. He slid into the seat across from me and didn't waste any time. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. "Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, and I don't blame you. But this goes deeper than I thought. It turns out Sarah's been hiding more than just the affair." I kept my expression steady, skeptical. "What are you talking about?" He took a shaky breath and pulled out a small manila envelope, pushing it across the table to me. "She's been seeing doctors. Specialists. She didn't tell me why until recently. And even then, I'm not sure she was being honest." I opened the envelope, my hand slightly shaking, and pulled out a stack of papers. Medical records. Prescription lists. Notes from consultations with various specialists. My heart raced as I flipped through them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The last page stopped me cold. It was a diagnosis. Sarah had been tested for a condition that, according to the notes, could affect fertility, something we'd struggled with in our marriage but had never fully explored. Jake looked at me, his face pale. She told me she was only with you because she thought it would help her keep this a secret. But now I don't even know who she was lying to, you or me. I felt a wave of shock and anger mixed together. The woman I'd loved, the woman I thought I'd known, had been hiding something so profound, not just from me, but from everyone around her. I'd thought I'd uncovered all her secrets, but here was something that changed everything. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my mind racing as I tried to process everything Jake had told me. Sarah had hidden this secret, something so deeply personal, and for years, she'd lied about why we couldn't have children. She'd never shared her struggles or the truth about her condition. The weight of it settled heavily on me. Had our marriage been based on lies from the very beginning? When I got home, Emily was waiting for me. She could see right away that something was wrong. "Mike, what happened?" I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with the mess of my past. But I needed to get this out. I told her about the meeting with Jake, the medical records, and Sarah's hidden diagnosis. Emily listened, her face a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Do you think she was lying to you even back then?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the bitterness rise in my chest. "But it explains so much. The way she'd always dismiss conversations about kids, how she'd dodge questions. It was like she'd decided to keep me in the dark and never let me in." Emily took my hand, grounding me. "I can't imagine how you feel, but maybe it's time to confront her, to hear the truth from her side." Her words stayed with me, and as much as I didn't want to face Sarah again, I knew she was right. I had to put this chapter to rest once and for all. The next day, I called Sarah and told her we needed to talk. She agreed, sounding surprised and a bit wary. We met at a park we used to go to together, back when things had been simple. She sat across from me on the bench, clearly nervous. "Why did you want to meet?" she asked, avoiding my gaze. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I met with Jake. He told me about your diagnosis. The doctors. The condition you kept secret from me our entire marriage." Her face went pale, and her eyes filled with shock and something else, shame. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. After a moment, she managed a quiet, How did you find out?" "You didn't leave me any choice," I replied, the frustration and betrayal evident in my voice. "Why, Sarah? Why would you hide something so huge from me? We went through years of wondering why we couldn't have kids, and you never once thought to tell me the truth." She looked down, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I was ashamed, Mike. I thought if you knew, if anyone knew, you'd see me as broken. I didn't want to be the reason we couldn't have a family. So, I kept it to myself, hoping maybe things would work out eventually." "Things would work out?" I repeated, incredulous. "You didn't give me a chance to be there for you, to understand. You didn't let me in, Sarah. And then, after all of that, you went and found someone else." She looked up, her face full of regret. "I know. And I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry." For the first time, I didn't feel anger or hatred toward her, just sadness. Sadness for what we could have been if she'd been honest, if she hadn't let her fear drive us apart. I stood up, feeling a strange calm. "I think it's time we both let go, Sarah. Whatever we had, it's gone now. I wish things had been different, but we both made our choices." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and for once, I saw her as vulnerable, stripped of all the lies and defenses she'd built around herself. Without another word, I turned and walked away, finally feeling the closure I'd been searching for. Months passed after that final meeting with Sarah, and I felt lighter, free from the weight of betrayal and secrets. My life with Emily had flourished in ways I'd never expected. Every day with her felt like a fresh start, like I was rebuilding my life on a foundation of trust and honesty. One evening, Emily and I were sitting on the couch, talking about our future, about plans for a trip we'd been dreaming up, when she turned to me, her face glowing with a smile I hadn't seen before. "Mike," she said softly, taking my hand. "I have something to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. "What's up?" She took a deep breath, her eyes sparkling with a happiness I could feel. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, the world stood still. The words echoed in my mind, and then, just as quickly, joy flooded through me. I pulled her into my arms, both of us laughing and crying, holding each other in a moment that felt like pure magic. That night, I realized that everything I'd been through, the heartbreak, the betrayal, even the anger, had led me here, to this life, to this love, to this family. Emily and I spent the evening dreaming about the future, about the life we would build together, and for the first time in years, I felt a peace that went down to my core. I'd finally moved on, leaving the past behind me. Sarah was a distant memory, and Jake, well, he'd faded into obscurity. None of it mattered now. I was ready to embrace this new chapter with Emily, knowing that I'd found the happiness I'd been searching for all along. With Emily by my side, and a new life on the way, I was finally home.